These images on the screen are not the results of an ordinary natural disaster. What we are witnessing are the consequences of a military operation perhaps unparalleled in modern warfare history. Evidence of an army being literally submerged alive. On the northeastern front of the war, there was a critical lifeline supporting the Russian advance towards Vovchansk. The bridges and crossing points over the Siverskyi Donets River, water of the Russian army's operations in northern Kharkiv Oblast. Cutting it off could mean halting the entire operation. However, on October 25th to 26th, strong signs emerged that this vital logistical corridor had been unexpectedly and devastatingly disrupted. It appears that Ukraine may have chosen a much more ingenious and asymmetric path, rather than directly targeting these well-protected crossing points. Repeatedly assessed to have not only left Russian villages near the dam, such as the Shebekino region, facing the threat of flooding. It appears that the overflowing Siverskyi Donets River may have flooded and rendered unusable Russian military positions. The situation has not only left border settlements such as Shebekino facing the threat of flooding, but has also potentially submerged thousands of Russian soldiers at the front and their only supply. The chain of events can be seen as the result of a highly creative and perhaps ruthless asymmetric trap set by Ukraine. According to information reflected in open sources and images shared on social media, water gushed uncontrollably from breaches in the dam structure, flooding the Siverskyi Donets River. So, how exactly did this chain of events unfold that appears to have left Russian forces on the Vovchansk front in such dire straits? When information and reports reflected in open sources are brought together, a picture of an operation consisting of carefully planned steps, lasting about 2 days and working like a perfect storm, may emerge. It appears that the first phase of the operation began on Saturday, October 25th, with the first attacks on the reservoir dam in the Belgorod region. While there are differing claims regarding the nature of these attacks, it can be assessed that they aim to cause initial damage to the dam structure. However, the critical blow is reported to have come on Sunday, October 26th, in the afternoon, around 3 p.m. In this second wave of attacks, according to some Russian sources, Ukraine may have used Dart-type kamikaze UAVs, which it has used before. As a result of these repeated attacks, it is reported that serious gaps were opened in the concrete structure of the dam, or that the existing damage increased and the water level in the reservoir dropped by more. The volume of water that spilled out of the dam uncontrollably rushed into its natural bed, the Siverskyi Donets River. The overflowing river waters began to wreak havoc along the Siverskyi Donets. First, according to reports, Russian military positions near the village of Grafovka on the Russian side of the river were observed to be submerged. This may have disrupted the defense arrangements along the border. Simultaneously, floodwaters crossed the border and reached Ukraine's occupied Kharkiv Oblast. Settlements such as Ogutsovo and Gatishe were reported to have been affected by the flooding. These areas were located on supply lines leading to Vovchansk. However, the most critical military consequence of the disaster was the effective severing of the main supply and transit routes to the Vovchansk front. It is believed that the overflowing river waters either destroyed the main bridge or bridges used by Russian troops to reach the front and particularly emphasized that the main supply and transit routes have been rendered unusable. It is estimated that alternative routes either do not exist or have become impassable for heavy military vehicles due to floodwaters and the resulting muddy terrain. In addition to the military dimension of the disaster, its impact on the civilian population cannot be ignored. It has been confirmed that at least 10 settlements in Russia's Shebekino district have been flooded. Belgorod Governor Gladkov was forced to advise residents of villages such as Bezlyudovka and Novaya Vovchansk to evacuate. For the people of the border region, who are already living in difficult conditions due to the war and frequently face power cuts and attacks, this flood threat could be a development that makes the situation even worse. This situation could lead to panic among the local population and increased anger towards the Kremlin. What was the response of the Kremlin and local Russian authorities to this military and potential humanitarian crisis created by Ukraine targeting the Belgorod Dam? It appears that Moscow's response to this incident followed a pattern often observed in similar crises, downplaying the situation, distorting the truth, and attempting to cover up the perception that they have lost control. This situation may have once again exposed the limits of the regime's propaganda machinery and potential vulnerabilities on the home front. When the scale of the incident became too big to hide, Belgorod Regional Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov was forced to confirm that the dam had been damaged by Ukrainian attacks. However, Immediately after this limited admission, efforts may have begun to cover up the real military consequence of the disaster, namely the destruction or flooding of the main supply bridge to the Vovchansk front. This incident may also have exposed potential administrative weaknesses and panic within Russia. Governor Gladkov's confirmation of the dam damage, followed by his evacuation recommendation, could be interpreted as an admission that the situation was beyond the limit of panic at the local level. Attacks on the region's energy infrastructure intensified both immediately before and after the Belgorod dam attack. Targeting transformer stations, power plants and fuel refineries may frequently lead to power, water and heating outages. These outages could dramatically worsen the living conditions of civilians, especially as winter approaches. It can paralyze people's daily lives. The outages allegedly experienced in Podolsk following the dam attack may illustrate the severity of this situation. Energy insecurity can create deep unrest and uncertainty in society. The impact of this situation on the civilian population could manifest itself in disruptions to the transport of basic necessities, long queues at fuel stations, and general transportation difficulties. The obstruction of civilian traffic due to the movement of military convoys or travel restrictions due to security concerns could further complicate the daily lives of the local population. The military consequences of the flood disaster caused by the breaching of the Belgorod Dam and the overflowing of the Siverskyi Donets River could potentially be catastrophic for Russian forces on the Vovchansk front. It appears that this environmental weapon move has not only created a temporary disruption, but may also have created a complete logistical death situation by putting thousands of soldiers and equipment in serious danger. According to initial assessments reflected in open sources and military analyses, the number of Russian units directly affected by floodwaters, or whose main supply lines have been cut, is quite significant. Reports indicate that at least 4 Russian brigades, specifically the 128th, 116th, 68th, and 136th Motorized Infantry Brigades, were present in the operational area and were affected by this situation. Furthermore, it is stated that other elements affiliated with Russia's 6th Army and 44th Corps, such as the 82nd Regiment and 138th Brigade, are also stationed in the region, particularly in the occupied Kharkiv Oblast, and may be at risk or isolated. Although it is not yet clear exactly how many of these units are physically trapped by floodwaters and how many are isolated solely due to the severing of supply lines, it can be estimated that potentially tens of thousands of soldiers are affected by this situation. The most critical military consequence of the disaster is that the main supply artery to the Vovchansk front, namely the bridge over the river or the main crossing routes, has become unusable. This situation could make it nearly impossible to deliver ammunition, fuel, food, water and medical supplies to the isolated units. It appears that alternative routes either do not exist or are impassable for heavy military trucks and armored vehicles due to floodwaters and mud. This could mean that the units are completely cut off logistically. It is even suggested that resupplying units south of Vovchansk may have become difficult. This incident can be seen as perhaps the most dramatic link in a broader campaign of attrition by Russia against critical infrastructure in Ukraine's border regions, particularly in the Belgorod and Bryansk oblasts, which appears to have intensified and become systematic in recent times. This campaign appears to directly affect not only military targets on the front line, but also the arteries deep within Russia that feed its war machine, as well as the daily lives of civilians living in border regions. When viewed within this broader context, the cumulative impact of the shock created by the dam attack on the community and people in the region becomes clearer. The combat capability of units that cannot be logistically supported rapidly declines. Artillery batteries that run out of ammunition fall silent. Tanks and armored vehicles that run out of fuel become immobile, and the morale and physical resilience of soldiers who run out of food and water collapse. It is also highly likely that floodwaters and the resulting thick mud rendered existing trenches and positions unusable and left armored vehicles stuck. Under these conditions, troops cannot be expected to mount an effective defense or attack. Their positions may well have become traps. Worse still, the severing of supply lines may also mean that retreat routes are cut off. Floodwaters and mud may also prevent troops from retreating or evacuating in an orderly manner. This situation may have trapped thousands of Russian soldiers between Ukrainian forces and rising waters. This is literally a situation of encirclement and drowning. Soldiers may have to fight both enemy fire and natural elements. This attack on the Belgorod Dam inevitably brings to mind the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine in June 2023. The destruction of the Kakhovka Dam led to the Dnieper River overflowing, flooding vast agricultural areas, forcing the evacuation of tens of thousands of people, and causing a major ecological and humanitarian disaster that negatively impacted Ukraine's counter-offensive plans. The Kiev administration and many international observers claimed that the dam was deliberately blown up by Russian forces. Moscow denied these claims. Now, the targeting of the Belgorod Dam could be interpreted as Ukraine using a similar water weapon against Russia this time. If Kakhovka was Russia's move to block Ukraine's advance, the Belgorod Dam could be seen as Ukraine's move to cut off Russia's supply lines. This could be a development showing the brutal symmetry of the war, and that both sides are capable of resorting to unconventional methods. By targeting the Belgorod Dam and crippling Russian logistics on the Vovchansk front, this operation may have the potential to be a game-changing move that could affect the overall strategic equation of the war, going beyond a mere tactical success on that front. When all these factors come together, the constant threat of attack, logistical disruptions, potential environmental hazards, power outages, and now the risk of flooding, it may create an unsustainable situation for civilians living in border regions such as Belgorod and Bryansk. Constant sirens, explosions, and disruptions to basic services can create an atmosphere of chronic stress, fear, and panic among the population. Measures such as Governor Gladkov's evacuation recommendation may reinforce the perception that the state is failing in its duty to protect. What seemed like a distant threat at the start of the war may now be knocking on the doors of people in these regions, disrupting their daily lives. This situation could undermine public confidence in the regime, increase migration tendencies, and threaten social stability in the long term. The dam attack may have acted as a catalyst, further exacerbating this already tense atmosphere and increasing the public's sense of helplessness. On the front lines, near Vovchansk, it appears that thousands of Russian soldiers now face an uncertain fate. It is believed that what will determine their fate may now be more than enemy missiles, the rising waters and severed supply lines. The people of Belgorod, meanwhile, may be facing the feeling that they are not being adequately protected or supported by the Kremlin. The perception that Moscow is unable to effectively protect the region and provide adequate assistance in times of crisis may be growing. More importantly, the reactions that will arise from the families of thousands of soldiers trapped at the front have the potential to create serious internal pressure on the Kremlin. If the perception spreads that soldiers have been abandoned or left to their fate, this could further erode the regime's domestic support. The Kremlin's lies not only conceal the truth, but also deepen the cracks on the domestic front. This can be seen as concrete evidence of the collapse of the domestic front. It appears that by repeatedly targeting a reservoir dam in the Belgorod region, Ukraine may have submerged not only a strategic bridge or supply routes, but also the Kremlin's military plans on the Vovchansk front. The will to fight of thousands of Russian soldiers, and perhaps even the regime's credibility in the eyes of its own people. The Russian army is mired not only in physical mud, but also in the wreckage of the insecurity and lies created by its own leadership. Thank you for choosing us.